July brought extremes of weather, heat and crop-destroying drought in the southwest, another flash flood in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and a long drought in the Midwest. Midwestern rains finally did come and were credited with the third straight year of bumper wheat crops. But rains did not come to Maine or California, where raging fires destroyed thousands of acres of parched timber. Southern California followed the sensational trash bag murder case, a series of 21 grisly killings in which the victims, all young men, were chopped to bits and discarded in plastic bags. Wayne Kearney was finally caught and pleaded guilty to 3 of the killings, with 18 cases still pending in Los Angeles. In Washington, there were new developments in the Korean favor buying scandals. The incidents appeared so numerous that Leon Jaworski, former Watergate prosecutor, was called in on July 20th as an unpaid special prosecutor. When asked how he viewed the job, Jaworski replied,
"The point is to find out what the truth is, and it's a search for the truth. This is what it really is. And if it were not that I felt I could be of some help in that regard, I wouldn't have come out of the woodwork, so to speak."
The president announced his decision to eliminate the billion-dollar B-1 bomber in favor of the cruise missile. Reactions were mixed, these two coming from Gerald Ford and Defense Secretary Harold Brown.
The president's decision to cancel the B-1 bomber is a very risky gamble. He is relying on a B-52 that is 20 years or more older, an aircraft that was developed in the 1950s. He's also gambling on a cruise missile system that is still in the research and development stages. My recommendation to the president and his decision not to proceed with production of the B-1 were based on the conclusion that aircraft carrying modern cruise missiles will better assure the effectiveness of the bomber component of U.S. strategic forces in the 1980s.
And while the president was agonizing over the B-1 bomber, we began to hear more and more about the controversial Neutron Bomb, a destroyer of life but not of property. Senator John Stennis of Mississippi described it as a weapon.
Well, it's very effective to those that it reaches, but the area of the spread is less. The area covered by the spread and the blast is less.
Senator Mark Hatfield of Oregon talked of the political implications.
There are variations of view, but I believe that the fundamental thing is that it is a deterrent, and mostly it's a deterrent to reaching some kind of a deal with the Russians on arms limitation. And that's the real deterrent it is, whether you want to argue whether it's a deterrent to the Russians or a deterrent to ourselves. The real deterrent, it inhibits, I think, a hopeful negotiated settlement.
The Alaska pipeline made news in July when it was shut down twice in 1 week, the first time routinely. The second followed an explosion at a pumping station. E.L. Patton, chairman of the Alyeska Pipeline Company, fielded questions about safety and ecology by phone.
Not really. Of course, when you handle oil, you have to be alert for all eventualities, but compared with starting up a petrochemical process or an oil refinery, there are so few pumps involved in this pipeline that we didn't really foresee this type of an accident.
And on July 29th, the first oil from the Alaskan North Slope reached the port of Valdez in southern Alaska. Earlier, on July 12th, President Carter made a statement which disturbed liberals in general and supporters of Medicaid-funded abortions in particular.
There are many things in life that are not fair, that wealthy people can afford and poor people can't. But I don't believe that the federal government should take action to try to make these opportunities exactly equal, particularly when there is a moral factor involved.
The long energy fight, the administration on one side, the Congress on the other, continued to unfold in the hot summer months. Taxes on big cars and on gasoline, and the possibility of gasoline rationing were examined from every conceivable angle and political point of view. Senator Henry Jackson, chairman of the Senate Committee on Energy, had this comment.
I would give him that authority with the stipulation, that is the authority to impose rationing, with the stipulation that Congress would have the authority to terminate it at any time.
And from Arizona Congressman Morris Udall.
If we find ourselves in another crisis, you can't crank up a rationing plan or a conservation plan overnight. If you're going to have rationing, you've got to have a machinery, you've got to have the details agreed upon. on. You may have to print some ration coupons and that sort of thing. And even if you never need them, a little bit of money and trouble spent on getting ready for that kind of an emergency could have a very big payoff. So we ought to take a look at it. I hope we never have to go to rationing, but I don't object to having a standby plan ready in the event of an emergency.
The administration also came under fire during the summer from a number of black organizations. Benjamin Hooks, executive director of the NAACP.
I think at this point that the black community is still very much in favor of President Carter, are still very sold on the fact that he's going to be a great president so far as blacks and poor are concerned. But I do feel an increased sense of a little feeling that maybe he's not moving quite like we expected. It hasn't crystallized yet. It's just something that I get the sense that there's a little feeling now that President Carter is not quite coming through.
And not much later, National Urban League President Vernon Jordan had harsher comments.
It is not enough to do better than Nixon or Ford. Black people didn't vote for Nixon and black people didn't vote for Ford. They voted for Jimmy Carter, and it is not enough for President Carter to be just a little bit better than his predecessor.
The president replied to the National Urban League.
It takes time to change the trends of history and to reverse the bureaucratic mechanism to one of support and compassion and concern and enthusiasm from what was formerly reluctance or lack of enthusiasm.
At 9:30 on the hot evening of July 13th, New York City was plunged into darkness. Lightning struck a few power lines in Westchester and touched off a dramatic chain reaction that caused 25 hours of outage. An act of God was blamed at first, but a series of investigations later put the major share of blame on an earthly Con Edison, a combination of bad luck and bad judgment. But as the black, violent hours ticked away, Mayor Beam got mad.
I want to express first my total outrage that at this hour, the city of New York is still without power, and the prospects for restoration of full electrical service remain vague as far as Con Ed is concerned. And given what occurred 12 years ago, Con Ed's performance is at the very least gross negligence, and at the worst far more serious.
New Yorkers' reactions were varied. Some threw parties, some went walking, and many seemed bemused. Some stayed up in the bars and clubs, and some went out to help. But many took advantage of the sudden chaos.
About 15 or 20 kids came cruising down the street, and when they saw things were cool, they grabbed onto the gate and pulled it down, pulled it right off the hinges.
Thousands were arrested for looting. Chief of Police Michael Codd had this reflection on blackouts.
There was less than 100 arrests in 1965. There were no significant injuries in 1965. The arrest figures for this period you've heard in excess of 3,500, or 3,300 rather. And the injuries, as I said, substantially above 100. We make no comparisons, and we don't try to figure out what the different factors may be or the different causations.
The damage was such that the Small Business Administration declared New York a disaster area, with losses estimated at $135 million. During the blackout in New York City, the president was busy at the White House with another crisis. An Army helicopter was shot down over North Korea, and serious negotiations began at once. A confrontation was avoided, and the 3 bodies and 1 survivor were returned. About the same time, the president addressed himself to yet another controversial issue.
Decriminalization is not legalization. I do not condone any drug abuse, and we'll do everything possible to reduce this serious threat to our society. Federal civil penalties should be continued as a deterrent to the possession and use of marijuana.
In the financial news, experts reported that the U.S. trade deficit had reached an all-time high in June, $2.82 billion. The dollar promptly declined in the European market, and the stock market dropped nearly 20 points in a single day, July 27th. America's taste for imported goods, including oil, and a generally gloomy world economic picture was blamed. However, inflation appeared to be under control. Consumer prices rose less than 1% during the summer, as farm prices seemed to level off. On August 10th, New Yorkers heard this statement from their mayor.
I'm very pleased to announce that the people of the city of New York can rest easy this morning because of the fact that the police have captured a man whom they believe to be the son of Sam.
Son of Sam, accused of murdering 6 and wounding 7, turned out to be a 24-year-old post office worker named David Berkowitz. Chief of Detectives John Keenan described the end of the greatest manhunt ever held in New York.
Found in the apartment was a submachine gun, 45 caliber. That was found in the car with clips of ammunition. Also found in the car was a 44 Bulldog revolver, fully loaded.
As the year ended, Berkowitz still had not come to trial for the killings. Death took its toll in 1977, particularly in the entertainment world, but nothing compared to the frenzy of mourning surrounding the sudden death of Elvis Presley on August 16th.
You know, not just because he's such a superstar, rock star, or anything, but he was so young, and he was only 42, and he had so much to live for, you know. And we think that we came down here, you know, from St. Louis, and we came to see his house and everything, and here we're seeing his funeral.
Mourners of all ages surrounded his mansion in Memphis, creating an atmosphere not unlike the furor he created 2 decades earlier. And predictably, Presley's records were sold out in the stores. In Los Angeles, the man who was captured piloting a U-2 spy plane over the Soviet Union and who lived to tell about it died in a helicopter crash. Francis Gary Powers was working for a local TV station at the time.
At 12:38 p.m., a helicopter crash was reported to us in the community of Encino. The craft apparently came down in a little league field just north of Balboa Golf Course. Both passengers in the craft were reported killed. In the crash, there was no resulting fire.
Groucho Marx, the man who elevated the insult to one of the 7 deadly virtues, also died in August at age 86. The first test flight of the Space Shuttle Enterprise was held on August 12th. It was successful, if short. The flight lasted just 5 minutes, but astronaut Rusty Schweikert was impressed.
I was thinking as we were standing out there that we're all out here watching the dawn, first the physical dawn, and then I think a more symbolic dawn of a breaking new era here in the way in which humanity looks at its environment. I think the space shuttle will bring human life out into space, and space will become part of our normal environment that we appreciate, we respect, we utilize, and work with. So to me, it's a very, very exciting moment.
A week later, the interplanetary spacecraft Voyager 2 was launched without mishap. The 1,820-pound vehicle developed a rash of unexpected problems shortly thereafter, but within a day was flying steadily in the direction of Jupiter, Saturn, and perhaps beyond. In Ohio, the past was not forgotten as protests continued against the building of a gymnasium on the site of the 1970 shootings at Kent State. These new demonstrations were more peaceful, despite the arrest of 194 people. Al Cantor, a student who was wounded in 1970, appealed to the demonstrators.
We're here to say, we're here to guard this land. What we're doing is perfectly correct and legitimate. We have the support of the American people. We're asking all of our brothers and sisters across the country to come here to Kent State to help us guard the land. All right. Okay.
But in the months to come, the gym would be erected. Throughout the summer, British and American negotiators attempted to persuade Rhodesian Prime Minister Ian Smith to permit majority rule in his nation where blacks vastly outnumber whites. But in early September, Smith won an overwhelming victory at the polls and promptly labeled the latest proposals mad, crazy, and insane. In South Africa, both black and white opposition leaders demanded an inquiry into the death in prison of Stephen Biko, one of the country's most influential young leaders. More than 1,200 students were arrested as they gathered to commemorate Biko's death in mid-September. And on September 8th, President Carter and Panama's Chief of Government, General Omar Torrijos, formally signed the controversial Panama Canal treaties in a lavish White House ceremony.
They mark the commitment of the United States to the belief that fairness and not force should lie at the heart of our dealings with the nations of the world.
An event which passed almost unnoticed was the admission of Vietnam to the United Nations. The entertainment world suffered more losses with the passing of Maria Callas, Leopold Stokowski, Ethel Waters, and character actor Zero Mostel. Milton Berle paid him tribute.
He had a big talent. He could sing, not very well, but he danced. He was a comedian. He wasn't just a comic. He was an actor who did comedy.
In Hollywood, the most-watched TV program of all time, Roots, won 9 Emmy Awards. But the event that grabbed most headlines in the late summer was the deepening crisis over budget director Burt Lance. Lance and his critics and friends argued before the Senate Committee on Governmental Affairs about banking practices, the use of Lance's bank's funds for political purposes, the family overdrafts, and numerous questionable loans. The federal controller prepared a report which challenged Lance on many counts.
The controller, in my judgment, has made an in-depth, thorough, and fair inquiry. It is a report of major significance. I let the report speak for itself. But I would note that the report says the information developed in the inquiry does not warrant the prosecution of any individual, nor has there been found any violation of federal banking laws or regulations with regard to any correspondent banking relationship.
Senator Ribicoff defended the embattled budget director.
I go with the president. I feel that the basic allegations against Mr. Lance have been disproved. My feeling is that Mr. Lance is a competent director of the Office of Budget and Management, and I'm glad the president's going to keep him.
When Lance's appointment had been confirmed months before, the only negative vote came from Senator William Proxmire.
To say he should resign under fire is something quite different. I think that the standards we're erecting here are rather different than the usual standards. We're talking about his conduct before he took office, not anything he's done in office. And I think in fairness to Mr. Lance and in fairness to the president, that they ought to find a time and place a little later on when he can step down. I think he should be replaced, but I wouldn't call on him to resign.
The president stood by his old friend from Georgia, but on September 21st, he reluctantly read Lance's resignation to the public.
I am convinced that I can continue to be an effective director of the Office of Management and Budget. However, because of the amount of controversy and the continuing nature of it, I have decided to submit my resignation as director of OMB. I accept Bert's resignation with the greatest sense of regret and sorrow. He's a good man. Even those who have made other statements about Bert have never alleged on any occasion that he did not do a good job as a director of the Office of Management and Budget.
Lance himself faded from the limelight, but the energy problem, the Canal treaties, Africa, and the Middle East continued into the fall. But meantime, it was baseball season. On that note, here's Milo Hamilton to cover the year of 1977 in the world of sports.
As 1977 opened, the College Football National Championship was still up for grabs. The University of Pittsburgh took care of that by beating Georgia in the Sugar Bowl game, played in the Louisiana Superdome in New Orleans. The Panthers were led to the #1 finish by Heisman Trophy winner Tony Dorsett, college football's first 6,000-yard rusher. In mid-January, the Super Bowl entries were Oakland of the AFC and Minnesota from the NFC. For the Vikings, it was to be their 4th visit, and they were growing old in search of their first Super Bowl victory. Quarterback Ken Stabler and the Raiders dominated Fran Tarkenton and the Vikes.
Quick lineup now, and he looks and throws. Intercepted by the Oakland Raiders. Willie Brown at the 30, 40, 50. He's going all the way. Old man Willie. Touchdown Raiders. Look at the Oakland Raiders joining him. They're coming off the bench. They're mobbing him down in the end zone. John Madden's grin is from ear to ear. He looks like a slit watermelon. Again, the Raiders just run the ball into the line of scrimmage. 15 seconds, 14. The Vikings aren't even going to use that last 1 second or one timeout. Listen to the count. Here it is. The Raiders closing in on the Super Bowl championship.
And Super Bowl 11 belonged to Oakland, 32-14. The fall of '77 saw two widely different teams play their way toward Super Bowl 12. Red Miller's enthusiastic Denver Broncos and Tom Landry's computerized Dallas Cowboys. The Chicago Bears made it to the playoffs for the first time since 1963 on the strength of one of pro football's greatest running backs, Walter Payton. Payton rushed for a single-game record of 275 yards. In college basketball, weeks before the NCAA playoff grind began, Marquette's coach Al McGuire announced he was going to retire at season's end. After winning their first 4 games, the Warriors wound up 21-7 and not certain of a tournament at-large bid. McGuire's 20 years in coaching projected him as a great showman, and he was to bow out with a smash hit. Marquette advanced over Cincinnati, Kansas State, Wake Forest, North Carolina, Charlotte, and then took it all in the championship game, beating North Carolina. As his last team presented the flamboyant McGuire with his first NCAA title, even Al gave way to the moment and was wrapped in a towel crying with joy. The NIT produced no such drama, but nonetheless, it took an upset to decide the winner as St. Bonaventure beat Houston. In the NBA, the Philadelphia 76ers, Houston Rockets, Denver Nuggets, and the LA Lakers won division titles. The Portland Trail Blazers, who finished second to the Lakers in the Pacific Division, started rolling near the end of the regular season, and with Big Bill Walton finally reaching NBA maturity, they didn't stop until they had taken the favored 76ers in 6 games to win their first NBA championship in their very first playoff berth.
3 will inbound. Here we go, the inbound to McGinnis. Drive, stop, pump, shoot, short, no good, and the game is over! The game is over! Look at that madhouse out there. The Portland Trail Blazers, at about 2 minutes and 18 seconds past the hour of 2 o'clock, have won the World Championship.
LA's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was the league's MVP for the second straight year and for the 5th time in his 8-year pro career. The Montreal Canadiens ran away with hockey's Stanley Cup. Their dominance was underscored with a season that saw them lose only 1 of their 40 home games, drop just 2 of 14 playoff games, and almost sweep individual honors. In horse racing, Kentucky produced a 3-year-old colt and a 16-year-old jockey, and both made history in '77. The colt, Seattle Slew, became the first undefeated Triple Crown winner. The jockey, Steve Coffin, his trail led to the most remarkable money-making splurge in race riding. Early in December, as he rode his 475th winner of the year, it made him racing's first $6 million man. The Indy 500 winner was no stranger. A.J. Foyt, who has left many opposing drivers in his exhaust trail, did it again as he crossed the finish line first at Indianapolis for the 4th time. Janet Guthrie scored a first at the '77 Indy 500 too. She was the first woman to drive there. Pro golf's major tournament winners in 1977 did not come from the Tour's veteran giants. The U.S. Open went to Hubie Green. Tom Watson won the Masters. The PGA winner was Lanny Wadkins. Over at the British Open, Tom Watson finished first. In the World Series of Golf, Lanny Wadkins' name was at the top again. Not until the Tournament of Champions did a name from the establishment appear in the winner's circle, Jack Nicklaus. Tom Watson became golf's leading money winner, dethroning Nicklaus. Judy Rankin once again was the leading earner on the Women's Golf Tour. In the world of tennis, 1977 saw Virginia Wade finally win her country's Wimbledon prize. But Chris Evert still claimed the #1 ranking among women. Bjorn Borg took the men's top prize at Wimbledon. Guillermo Villas captured the U.S. Open and also finished first on the Grand Prix circuit. Jimmy Connors was runner-up at both Wimbledon and the Open, but based on overall results by computer, Jimmy was given the #1 rating among the men. A hint of things to come were exhibited by 14-year-old Tracy Austin, the young lass out of California, arrived complete with braces, pigtails, and a 2-fisted backhand that took her all the way to the quarterfinals in the U.S. Open. Abrasive skipper Ted Turner formed a crack, hard driving crew, led it aboard the Craft Courageous, proceeded to rip his competition on and off the race course, then swept Australia in 4 races, and claimed the booty that goes with winning the America's Cup. Soccer's legendary Pele's reputation preceded him to the States. The great years were behind him when he arrived, but he came here with a mission. Playing for the New York Cosmos, Pele led them to the championship of the North American Soccer League. That was expected. The record crowds, including nearly 78,000 for one of the playoff games, was the unexpected surprise. The crowds, more than the title, enabled Pele to gracefully retire to Brazil, knowing his mission had been accomplished. Muhammad Ali kept his heavyweight boxing crown with wins over Alfredo Evangelista and Ernie Shavers, but was beginning to show the wear and tear of his 36 years and 57 pro fights. After observing Ali in 1977, his boxing physician, Dr. Ferdy Pacheco, saw warning signs. Ali's heart and mind were no longer in it. With that diagnosis, one had to wonder how far into '78 before Ali's crown was to be toppled. During the fall, the major college football season produced only one undefeated and untied team, Texas. Running to the Heisman Trophy was the best way again, and Texas workhorse Earl Campbell got there first. The 1977 Major League Baseball season had more of almost everything: millionaires, teams, home runs, customers, and controversies. Individual highlights came from players who didn't make it to the World Series. Batting champions, Rod Carew of Minnesota hit .388 for his 6th title and was the American League's MVP. Pittsburgh's Dave Parker topped the National League hitters with a .338 mark. The National League's MVP went to George Foster, who kept the Reds from dropping deeper than second by hitting 52 homers and driving in 149 runs. Steve Carlton, 23-10, Philadelphia's brilliant lefty, survived a covey of 20-game winners to win the Cy Young Award in the National. In the American, they used one of Billy Martin's tactics. They dipped into the Yankee bullpen and came up with Sparky Lyle. Another legend fell. On August 29th, Lou Brock swiped his 993rd base, erasing Ty Cobb's mark. The division flags went to the Dodgers, Phillies, Royals, and Yankees. Exciting playoffs put the Yanks and Dodgers into the World Series. New York won in 6 games. The Yankees, who had fought each other harder than the rest of the league at times during the season, were ignited by Reggie Jackson's batting theatrics. 5 homers, a new series record, including 3 in the final game.
Jackson with 4 runs batted in and sends a fly ball to center field and deep. That's going to be way back and that's going to be gone. Reggie Jackson has hit his 3rd home run of the game.
Babe Ruth had done it twice in 26 and 28. All of Reggie's homers came on the first pitch, and all were hit downtown. Jackson was obviously the series hero and MVP. The Yankees, returning as World Series champions for the first time since 1962, shouldn't have been a surprise. After all, it was the best team that money could buy. In a year when money talked and controversy and scandals threatened to dominate results of the games, matches, and even the athletes themselves, sport prevailed. The accomplishments of the thousands of gifted athletes, hopefully for them and for the fans, will be among the memories that linger the longest from sports, 1977.
On October 4th, the dramatic Senate filibuster against the deregulation of natural gas prices was abruptly terminated by Majority Leader Robert Byrd and Vice President Mondale. Critics complained about their strong-arm tactics, and James Abourezk, Democrat from South Dakota, leader of the filibuster, defended it.
We've kept this thing going for 13 days, and our objectives in keeping the filibuster going have been, number one, to switch enough votes so that we could defeat deregulation and save the public a great deal of money. Secondly, to inform the public of what was happening.
If price controls were removed, what then would happen to the price of gas? The debate was unresolved at the year's end. Against a background of international storm clouds over the Geneva talks, President Carter visited the United Nations for a major address on the Middle East.
Good faith negotiations will also require acceptance by all sides of the fundamental rights and interests of everyone involved. For Israel, this means borders that are recognized and secure. For the Arabs, the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people must be recognized. One of the things that binds the American people to Israel is our shared respect for human rights. It is clear that a true and lasting peace in the Middle East must also respect the rights of all people of the area.
On the same trip to New York, the president conferred with both the Egyptian and Israeli foreign ministers. Moshe Dayan outlined the Israeli terms unequivocally.
The Israeli position is that we shall not negotiate and have in Geneva the PLO, and we shall not negotiate over a Palestinian state.
Nevertheless, Dayan and Carter hammered out a brief working paper on plans for Geneva, and within a few days, an Israeli spokesman announced official acceptance.
The government approved the working paper on suggestions for the resumption of the Geneva Peace Conference as agreed upon between the President of the United States and the Secretary of State and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Israel on October the 5th, 1977.
While in New York, President Carter made a whirlwind tour of the wasteland of the South Bronx, and later made this optimistic comment.
As we passed the high-rise apartments a few blocks back, it was obvious that in the midst of devastation and blight and deterioration, they're holding their own. The people seem to be very proud of them. They've not had vandalism nor graffiti damage. The little park area there was well used by the children, and it's just like an oasis in the midst of a desert.
And in Washington, groups of students and blacks marched solemnly around the Supreme Court building and the Capitol to demonstrate against the court's decision to hear the Bakke case, involving issues of affirmative action versus reverse discrimination. Grantland Johnson of the National Committee to overturn the Bakke decision was chief spokesman.
The struggle against racism does not end here today.
It doesn't end with the campaign against the Bakke decision. This is the beginning of the resurgence of a mass movement in general in this country. And we're saying that the struggle against the Bakke decision represents a focal point for that struggle, because people have clarity when they understand what the basis of the unity is. It is that basis and that clarity that will give us long-term strategic unity in order to turn this country around. And that's what we're trying to say.
No decision was handed down in 1977. Throughout the year, the president's epic battle with Congress and the energy interests became more and more bitter, until in October, the Senate virtually rejected the administration's entire program. The president's statement was strong.
As is the case in time of war, there is potential war profiteering in the impending energy crisis. This could develop with the passing months as the biggest ripoff in history.
Senator Baker expressed regret.
I think it's unfortunate that the president put his emphasis on the idea that this action by the Senate was the result of intense lobbying by special interest. It wasn't anything of the sort. It was the careful analysis that the Senate gave to a bad bill and decided that it had to be improved, in this case improved by removing the onerous tax burdens that the program provided.
Simultaneously, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee was holding full-scale debates on Panama. At an informal press conference, Senator Barry Goldwater spoke with reporters.
There are still some points that are not clear. The position of defense of the canal, for example, is not clear in my mind. The American people's opinion is we should not give the canal away, and that's it.
Henry Kissinger supported the administration.
Panama is the smallest and weakest of nations. We are not giving the canal to Panama. We are rather ensuring our ability to protect it. By taking constructive action now to revise our relationship with Panama in an atmosphere free of physical pressure, while we are still able to assess objectively the long-term risks and benefits, we will be demonstrating fundamental strength, not weakness.
Our chief negotiator with Panama, Saul Linowitz, tried to explain to the Senate and the public just what it was all about.
The correct interpretation of this principle is that each of the two countries shall, in accordance with their respective constitutional processes, defend the canal against any threat to the regime of neutrality, and consequently shall have the right to act against any aggression or threat directed against the canal or against the peaceful transit of vessels through the canal.
The president also tried to put it in perspective.
In balance, in every aspect of measuring the treaty terms, our nation comes out very well in the negotiations. The Panamanians wanted very high monetary payments. They did not get them. Panama wanted immediate transfer to them of operating rights of the canal. They did not get them. Panama wanted an immediate withdrawal of our armed forces. They did not get them. But I think they've negotiated in good faith, and our country has come out very well.
Panamanians, meanwhile, held a referendum and endorsed the treaties. But during 1977, the U.S. Senate did not vote on the treaties. In October, this voice was silenced forever.
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas.
Bing Crosby, whose 50-year career spanned every entertainment medium, died suddenly while on vacation in Spain. 1977 had its share of aircraft hijackings. The most sensational occurred in mid-October over the French Riviera. It lasted 106 hours and took 90 terrified passengers to an airport in Somalia. The hijackers were West Germans, demanding the release of political prisoners. A shaken survivor tried to describe the dramatic commando raid that freed them, literally minutes before the terrorist deadline to kill all the hostages.
That's it, he said. I give him a deadline, he said, 40 minutes, and then you'll be all blown up. So he tied all our hands in the back with the nylon stuff very tight, but then he tightened the seatbelt very tight on us. And there comes a man, and he was painted black in the face, and he started talking German. He said, "We're here to rescue you, get down," he screamed, and they started shooting, and they ran in front, and I don't know how,
Within days, the German prisoners took their own lives in their cells, and a German businessman kidnapped earlier in the year was found dead. There were other atrocities, and the season of terror in Western Europe continued. Perhaps the anticlimax of the year came in October when, after months of litigation and appeals, the supersonic Concorde began its first test flights at Kennedy International Airport and was quieter than expected. Out of the mouth of a first grader came these words.
It was quiet and clean, and it was big like a bird.
Regular commercial flights began almost immediately. In the newest chapter of the Korean scandal, a House Ethics Committee heard testimony concerning the handing out of money to congressmen by the former Korean ambassador, Kim Dong-jo.
When I entered his office, he was at his desk. He was stuffing something into envelopes. As I walked over to his desk, I could see $100 bills on his desk, and also in the attaché case atop his desk. And he was stuffing $100 bills into the envelopes.
That was a Korean embassy employee. Committee counsel John Niels was questioning House office workers.
I went into his office and I looked, there was a white envelope in the top drawer, and I took it out and I opened it, and then I picked up the telephone and in his office.
Did you say something to the congressman when you picked up the telephone?
Yes, I said there was more money in the envelope than I'd ever seen in my life.
And what exactly did you see in the envelope, Mrs. Elder?
There was a stack of $100 bills, about that many.
Was that about an inch high?
I would guess about an inch.
Survivor of the year was definitely Senator Hubert Humphrey, a victim of inoperable cancer. The Congress paid him a 30-minute tribute, one of many in Washington, but Humphrey himself could only participate by telephone.
I've been told by my office staff that many people have been very disappointed because I'm not there with you tonight. But I think you know why. I felt that it was necessary for me to, at least this week, continue and hopefully complete some of the treatment that I've been receiving at our university. And I'm happy to tell you that things are coming along just great. And I feel better every day, and may the Lord just help me get along and to be able to gain back my strength so I can be back there with all of you that are doing such a great job.
In the aftermath of the suspicious death of South African leader Stephen Biko, international pressures continued to harden against that nation. Early in November, Secretary of State Vance made this announcement.
We are withdrawing our naval attaché from Pretoria. And in addition to that, we are recalling the commercial officer in Johannesburg. The latter recall is being done in connection with our review of our economic relationships with South Africa. We will prohibit all export of items for police and military in South Africa. In addition, there will be no more exports of spares and maintenance shipments for items whose exports would be prohibited.
Then on November 4th, a worldwide embargo was ordered against South Africa by the Security Council of the UN. Also included was an order forbidding any member nation to give South Africa nuclear weapons. This was the first time the Council had ever invoked sanctions against a member nation. It was a tough ruling, based on tough reasons, said Secretary General Kurt Waldheim.
It is abundantly clear that the policy of apartheid, as well as the measures taken by the South African government to implement this policy, are such a gross violation of human rights and so fraught with danger to international peace and security that a response commensurate with the gravity of the situation was required.
U.S. Ambassador Andrew Young expressed this nation's attitude.
We have just sent a very clear message to the government of South Africa that the measures which were announced on October 19th have created a new situation in South Africa's relationship with the rest of the world. There should be no further doubt in Pretoria today that the continuation of the course on which the government of South Africa is now embarked can only lead to further strains on the ties between South Africa and the other members of the international community.
South Africa assailed the Western nations who joined in the embargo. Foreign Minister Rudolf Botha said that the action was an incitement to violence and would stiffen the resolve of South Africans to defend their nation. Donald Sowell, United States Ambassador from South Africa, went on National Public Radio.
I have been complaining about is the manner in which the pressures have been exercised.
obviously, a country does not live in isolation. Obviously, a country has to take into account views and ideas which are expressed in important quarters. But I must repeat with all the fiber of my being that punitive action of the kind taken in the Security Council, to my mind, is unproductive.
After months of persuasion, negotiations, and suggestions about the issue of majority rule in Rhodesia, Prime Minister Ian Smith made this surprising announcement.
I invited the leaders of the black political parties to enter into constitutional negotiations with the government. Government is prepared to enter the negotiations on the understanding that if their requirements are met, they will accept the principle of majority rule based on adult suffrage.
Although a breakthrough statement in itself, many wondered how he would realistically carry out the promise. Early in November, John Medeiros, State Department spokesman, announced postponement of the president's promised overseas trip.
Over this past weekend, the heads of the governments of the 9 nations which President Carter was scheduled to visit between November 22nd and December 2nd were informed that he would postpone his trip because of the need to remain in Washington during congressional consideration of the administration's energy program. The president indicated in the same message his hope that a mutually convenient date could be found for a later visit in the near future.
President Carter later addressed the nation and again described the energy problem as he saw it.
Our biggest problem, however, is that we simply use too much and waste too much energy. Our imports have more than tripled in the last 10 years. Although all countries could, of course, be more efficient, we are the worst offender.
But many members of Congress did not share this view of the cause and effects. One of these was Senator Robert Packwood of Oregon.
I think it may help his cause. I'm afraid Congress may pass a bill close to what the president asked for. But if we pass the bill as he wants it, instead of improving our situation, it's going to make it worse. Instead of reducing our oil imports, it's going to cause them to increase to between 10 and 11 million barrels of oil a day. It's going to cost us an additional $25 billion in payments to the Arab countries for oil, and probably will cost us, in the United States, between 500,000 and 1 million jobs.
On November 5th, longtime orchestra leader Guy Lombardo died, but his Royal Canadians vowed to continue the tradition of danceable music. Election Day returned Governor Brendan Byrne to Trenton and Mayor Coleman Young to Detroit. The New York City mayoral race was almost an anticlimax, a long campaign with a crowded field of 7 and a close runoff of the Democratic primary. The winner, former Congressman Ed Koch. In Houston, the First National Women's Conference drew almost 2,000 delegates from across the nation, 3 First Ladies included. Among the speakers at this federally funded conference on the status of women was former Detroit Congresswoman Martha Griffiths, one of the prime movers of the Equal Rights Amendment.
5 years and 9 months of the ratification time has passed. There's 15 months left for women to make themselves human. That's all we ask. In my time, just put us into that Constitution. Is that too much?
At the end of a long and symbolic relay race, Susan B. Anthony, granddaughter of the pioneer feminist, was there to receive the flaming torch.
Thank you, women and runners of America. You have finished one race, the race begun by the founding mothers at Seneca Falls. Now we race not for this torch or any perishable wreath, but for the imperishable wreath for women in full equality with men.
In mid-November, world history was irrevocably changed by the historic visit of Egyptian President Anwar Sadat to Jerusalem and the Israeli parliament. Never in the 20 years of Israel's history had an Arab leader set foot in the country. It happened suddenly, melodramatically, and it captured the imagination of the Western world. Millions of viewers held their breath while Sadat spoke, through a translator, to Israel and the world.
I declared on numerous occasions that Israel has become a reality that was recognized by the world. And if we want a true peace, we welcome that you live amongst us in peace and security, in fact and indeed.
And while the West applauded Sadat's virtuoso performance, Many in the Arab world moved to discredit and isolate Egypt. This is Libyan Ambassador Mansour Kikia.
It is the decision of our popular organization in Libya that if the visit takes place, and we are sorry that it took place, that we shall break relations with Egypt, ask Egypt to get out of the Arab League, ask to remove the headquarters of the Arab League from Cairo, and also implement the boycott laws against Israel, against Egypt.
The Syrian ambassador, Mawafil Alaf, condemned Sadat's mission and went so far as to make this comparison.
How can he give this defeatist character to the struggle of the Arab people? Could anyone have imagined that General de Gaulle would travel in his search for peace to meet the leaders of the racist Nazi regime in Berlin?
But in Israel, the air was hopeful and enthusiastic. On the day of Sadat's arrival, one of the managers of the King David Hotel, where Sadat was to stay, observed,
"The mood is so good that everyone can only think of one thing, peace."
Back home in the United States, former Secretary of State Kissinger, who originated Israeli-Arab shuttle diplomacy during the Nixon administration, had this cautious comment.
If 6 weeks ago anyone had suggested that an Arab leader might publicly visit Israel, it would have been considered preposterous. So the mere fact of that visit is a tremendous breakthrough. Of course, if it fails, it therefore makes the disappointment all the greater.
And even as we sat down to our Thanksgiving dinners, President Carter reminded us to keep the two Mideast leaders in our thoughts.
This year we have, just before Thanksgiving, a good omen in the Middle East, which might bring to humankind one of the greatest blessings of all, and that's peace. And all of us want to remember in our prayers the hopes that we harbor for a peaceful settlement of those differences there and those around the world.
When the dramatic weekend was over, an invitation was extended to Prime Minister Begin for a Mideast summit meeting in Cairo. But in view of the recent political moves against Egypt, what would happen if Israel were the only other nation to take part, said Sadat.
It is for everyone to decide for himself. But if the Israelis only come, I shall start the conference.
In early December, Egypt cut off diplomatic relations with Syria, Iraq, Libya, Algeria, and South Yemen, nations which had been hostile to Sadat. Arab leaders also held a summit of resistance to further isolate Israel, a stand approved by the Soviet Union. Practically unnoticed during this bravura diplomacy, a South African election defied world opinion and gave Prime Minister John Vorster massive support. The Prime Minister defended his record this way.
My approach will be, as it has always been, to consult with the black and white leaders, and you know, and everybody else knows, that I've consulted more with black and colored leaders than all my predecessors combined. That process of consultation will go on. I believe in consultation, and I've proved.
December saw a hijacked plane crash in Malaya, killing all 100 people aboard. Bermuda erupted in rioting following the first capital punishment for murder in modern times. The United Mine Workers called its men out of the mines, a strike that would outlast the calendar year. Korea agreed that Tan Sung Park would return to Washington to appear as a witness before Congress. And once again, controversy flared over abortion following a joint resolution in Congress allowing Medicaid funds to be used in case of illness, incest, and rape. Senator Edward Brooke of Massachusetts was among those who were disappointed.
I don't want to call it a victory or a defeat. I think that it really means, however, that abortions for poor, indigent women in this country have been liberalized, if we might use that language, under the compromise language accepted now by the House and by the Senate.
In Omaha, Secretary of Agriculture Robert Berglund addressed a rally of discontented farmers.
There are some who are saying that the government should guarantee 100% of parity. I submit the government's safest course is to provide you with the tools that you can use so that you can achieve the cost of production plus a reasonable profit. Get control over your own destiny. Get control of your business. That's the way you're going to achieve the kind of incomes that you deserve.
Later, farmers converged on Washington to protest national farm policy in a parade of trucks and tractors, and a farm strike began within a week, threatening 14% less wheat in 1978. And while Americans stepped up their Christmas shopping, Israeli and Egyptian officials were setting the stage for a new summit in Ismailia. Both leaders seemed incredulous at the acceleration of events.
Believe me, I never imagined that this can take place soon. Well, I think you agree with me. Everything is moving really very fast. Well, I'm ready to receive Mr. Begin here in Egypt whenever he chooses.
Well, if we had said 5 weeks ago, as simple as that, I'm going to visit Cairo, yes, perhaps somebody would like to commit me. But now everybody accepts it. It's natural. There is a great change. Yes. Things which were fantastic, absolutely fanciful, only a few weeks ago, now have become natural, self-understood. This is the proof that we are on the proper road.
On the eve of the summit, President Sadat reiterated by phone the basic barrier to a permanent settlement.
All the land occupied after 67, and this is not a concession from the Israeli side at all. It is our land. The land that was occupied after 67.
When the meetings began, Israel agreed to the surrender of Sinai, but many other issues appeared to be stumbling blocks. In the face of extravagant hopes, the meetings did not live up to expectations. While Americans celebrated Christmas, they learned of the death of Charlie Chaplin, the unique, tragicomic little tramp of silent movies, whose pictures enjoyed an immediate and worldwide revival. In L.A., the holiday season was marred by the fear of the Hillside Strangler, an elusive killer who had taken the lives of 12 young women before the year ended. Several suspects were arrested and released, and the reign of terror continued into the new year. And in late December, the President and First Lady flew off to Warsaw on their long-postponed trip to 9 nations.
Poland is a nation that has good communications and cooperation with the nations in Western Europe, with Germany, Belgium, Holland, France, and others, and also are an integral part of the Warsaw Pact nations. And I think this ease of communication and this natural and historical friendship is a basis on which Poland can provide additional cooperation and communication between ourselves and the Soviet Union.
The next stop was Tehran, where they were greeted on New Year's Day by the Shah himself.
In our country, according to ancient tradition, the visit of the first guest in the new year is an omen for that year. And although the Iranian New Year is celebrated with the advent of spring, nevertheless, since the distinguished guest tonight is such a person of goodwill and achievement, naturally we consider it as a most excellent omen.
And so closed 1977, a year dominated by 2 presidents, Carter and Sadat. A year also dominated by the complex problems of welfare, taxes, urban affairs, and Social Security. And yet, without the stress of major upheavals, Americans of goodwill appeared to apply thought and understanding to these dilemmas. New Year's Eve would never be the same without Ben Grauer and Guy Lombardo. But nevertheless, in perspective, 1977 was not a bad time.